You know, you really haven't uploaded anything to your channel for a while.
Let me enjoy the holidays.
The holidays have been over for 3 weeks.
I'm not out of candy cane cookies yet.
Look, if you stop doing work, then everyone's gonna think you're finished and move on.
I've been doing plenty of work. I did a Let's Watch of Dusk's Dawn with the MLP Connoisseur. I've done podcast and comic crossovers that are still in the works as we speak. I joined the Rift. I mean, I haven't exactly been out of the game here.
But your channel's been inactive since Christmas.
I got sick.
Well, you're better now. Don't you want to put the cookies down and get a jump on your next projects?
No.
Well, don't you want to do a reaction in the meantime, just to let everyone know that you haven't forgotten them?
No.
You forgot to tell everyone what the top 10 episodes of Season 5 are. You realize people are supposed to chant "You suck" to that music, right?
I hate you.
Okay, so the last time I saw you guys was just before Christmas, and I hope you all really enjoyed the holidays, because I mainly spent them getting lots and lots of presents like this. This is what I go through for you people. Okay, so as a quick way to start up again, I'm just going to give you a quick list of the top 10 episodes of Season 5, just as my pure, unfiltered thoughts, because a more significant episode lists from this show may or may not be on the horizon here, so, anyway, without further ado, let's get right to it. Number 10. The Cutie Remark. Okay, now there will be spoilers, so yeah, don't watch this if you haven't seen any of these episodes yet and you want to first, but anyway, in my review of this one, I said that it was not one of the better two-parters because it didn't really follow much of an arc. Like, there wasn't a whole lot of escalation, and on top of that, Starlight Glimmer's story, where she's redeemed at the end, was laughable. I mean, I was literally laughing at it as I was watching it. And the people who tried to convince me otherwise kind of made me see it in an even worse light because they all really wanted me to debate it with them, and then once I stopped laughing and started thinking about, okay, why it doesn't hold up point for point, that, yeah, it was actually even worse than I really thought at first, because what they're saying is that someone like this, like Starlight Glimmer, who felt entitled to kidnap others and try to physically and mentally cripple them for life against their will, of course, can just be treated as a simple case of heartbreak, that all they need is a little bit of patience and understanding, and they're going to be just A-okay. And, okay, we've all had bad days. Some of us have even had really bad days. What she did is not normal. In fact, there are lots of real-life instances of people kind of like her who were very narcissistic. I mean, funny enough, her portrayal through the series was pretty good, pretty spot on for what someone like that, someone who does those things is like, until right at the end. I don't know why they... maybe just thinking too optimistically. But anyway, I mean, yeah, there are several real-life instances, documented, recorded, what have you, where people like her were kind of put on a really long leash because, like, it might have just been a really emotional scenario. And what a lot of those people did after being put on a long leash, they're the kinds of things that I really do not wish to talk about. So, yeah, and I think you're gonna run it. You probably have run into people like her in real life, and a lot of people probably will, including the kids watching this. So I actually think it's very important to teach the right moral on how to deal with people like her. So it legitimately kind of bothers me that grown men and women somewhere out there watched this and said, "Perfect. That is exactly how you should deal with people like that. That was beautiful." But even so, yeah, nothing like starting off a best list by bashing episodes. Even so, that was still just the end point, just how they resolved it. The episode itself, I mean, it is my least favorite two-parter. It was either that or the Crystal Empire. I was up in the air before, but I've decided it's this one. But even so, the standard for two-parters is very, very high, so that's still good enough for 10th place. And, yeah, as far as how good this episode actually is, on one hand, I think we can all agree that, like I said, there's not much of an arc here. It's a very episodic episode. I mean, it's not going for one big adventure, one grand adventure with this really meaningful arc or anything. It's going for a bunch of little adventures, each one just a little burst of creativity. And And that's very entertaining for what they come up with. And there is a thread driving it all. There's or connecting it all at least. It is sort of a game between Starlight and Twilight, but that is still just what's sort of hanging over it the whole time. That's not really the point, or that's not what really changes as the episode goes on, or what we get more into detail on as the episode goes on. That's just what's sort of hanging over it as we have one little adventure in an alternate timeline, and then reset, and then another adventure, and then reset, and eventually that catches up with it. I mean, you see that all they're doing is repeating scenarios at the very end where Twilight just comes into one and goes right back, like she probably could have done all along. But anyway, there was some disappointment there because this whole season seemed to really be building up a lot of possible story routes in different episodes, maybe hinting at how Twilight was shaping up in her new role, lots of cutie mark themes, stuff like that. And so instead they're not going to have any arc at all in the big two-parter. They're just going to give us a bunch of little adventures. Okay, so there is disappointment there, but disappointment is not the same thing as doing a bad job. I mean, there have been past just one-part episodes that were just supposed to be multiple different scenarios purely to be entertaining the whole time, and this one was that on a grander scale and with higher stakes. And I mean, it has visuals, it has a little bit of excitement, and it has a lot of the characters put in scenarios we'd never get to see them in otherwise, so sort of the novelty of that, and maybe, I don't know if you could call it character exploration, but well, maybe for lack of a better word at least. So, okay, it has that, and nothing that we haven't gotten anywhere else better, but still done very well, and I mean, done just for what it is. Like, I mean, it's supposed to be entertaining from start to finish, and not much of an arc. Okay, so it loses ground on the other ones in that it doesn't build to anything even bigger than it started out as. It doesn't build to anything besides the new worst redemption story in the entire franchise. I think that's safe to say, but still, it is entertaining from start to finish to a very high degree, so okay, that is good enough for 10th place. Number 9. Made in Manhattan. Now, like I said in my review, this episode is just a triumph of understated writing, which has traditionally been one of the show's biggest strengths, I would argue. Just, like, really focusing on the little details, just getting the most out of them, and just trying to get the nuance of each scenario. Well, I guess everybody likes vague terms like nuance, but just more specifically, like, instead of trying to really play up a scenario, really sell it to you by maybe having some characters say that, like, oh, our generosity has ruined us, or just, oh, how cruel, how hard this, I've never, this is worse than anything we've ever seen, anything like that. It's instead, it just tries to paint you a picture of what you'd think such a scenario would look like. And instead of spending its time trying to tell you these things, it spends its time trying to give it that third dimension, try to make this what you'd think characters like this in a scenario like this would kind of look like, and letting you see it and decide for yourselves. And since most people can personally identify with scenarios at least similar to something as not everyday, but as, well, relatable, I'll say, as this, then not only do you connect with it more, but you believe it a little bit more, because, in fact, like, it still gets the same point across, and you believe it more. And I will say, this episode actually isn't even the best example in the show's history of, like I said, understated writing. It's not its best example of that, but it is still very good. It just has like a handful of just really golden moments, I would say, like with the comedy, that bit where Rarity has decided that she's solved the problem they went all the way to Manhattan to solve by stopping someone from buying the wrong hat, and Applejack just stares at her and her eyebrow just slowly goes up. That makes me laugh every time I see it. That just, like, absolutely perfect reaction to that. Or Rarity referencing the Peanuts. Like, this is another way the understated bit works, because the show has done reference humor just more and more recently, but it almost seems like formulaic. Like, hey, doesn't this vaguely make you think of this? Pull out the reference, but instead of making the point that it is a reference, like really trying to make Rarity look like Lucy, or trying to make the thing she's in look even more like the Peanuts booth that Lucy always uses. Now, instead, not everybody actually got the connection at first, because not everybody, well, for one, not everybody I think has seen the Peanuts as much, but but that almost makes it even more fun. Yeah, it comes across like Rarity doesn't even realize how this is similar to this quaint solution in the Peanuts that never really worked. So, okay, that's I think all the funnier for it. And I get the great example is when Rarity starts to despair and she's really just going over the top and she's why, and then Applejack just stuffs her hoof in her mouth and keeps going, and that's it. That's just like, that's all the attention that's all the attention Rarity being over dramatic needs. Just going off a rocker like, thank you, moving on. And that makes me laugh every time I see it. But it's not just the comedy too. I think the character progression and the serious stuff also benefits from this approach, because like the scene where Applejack is trying to clean up the park, like I said before, it doesn't need to play that up to us, have them say that, oh, this is just so hard, or why can't anybody else help? We can't do this all on our own. It just shows it to us. It just shows us Applejack being a hard and diligent worker, and not complaining and anything like that. Like, it doesn't tell us that she's not a complainer. She doesn't complain. It leaves you to put that together on your own. And it just shows her getting scuffed up and kind of messed up and worn out, and just trying her best to work through it. And at the same time, from her mood and from how it's going, you can tell that it's not working, that it's not going to work out this way, that she's just fighting an uphill battle that she can't win. But again, it doesn't say any of that. It just shows it. It gives us the best impression it can, and like what it looks like to get scuffed up and messed up and worn out after a hard day's work, and still have too much to go for you to be able to get it done. And the effect just sinks right in. It really does Applejack a favor, I think, because it doesn't plead her case to us. It shows us what she is and why we should like her. So I really appreciated that. In fact, like, some people have tried to tell me that Cutie remarked the ending of that with Starlight Glimmer, that it was so great because it was way more subtle than other two-parters. Like, nobody started shooting friendship lasers, so that means that that Cutie remark was more subtle, and no, that's just downscaling. There is a difference. All right? The ending with Starlight Glimmer was anything but subtle, I would argue. Like, this is what subtle writing looks like, this episode. And that all said, it's still not a great episode, because for me the biggest flaw was that it passed up its chance to really push this over the top with what should have been the key point of rising action, where they actually build the stage at the end and decide that they're just gonna put everything they have into what little they can manage with this simple stage at the edge of the park, and just having the method mares are called perform on that. And it actually should. And action is a relative term here, but the thing about action, unless you're trying to just dazzle us with it, is that it's not actually the act itself, it's how much it means to the characters, and how much we can see it affecting them, how much they get into it, how much they're on the edge of their seat worrying about it as it's happening. That's what sells it to us, not the act itself. And instead it just skips over the act itself, like Applejack just decides they're going to go for it, and then suddenly they have a stage that Applejack is just finishing working on. So, what should have been the moment to really push this over the top, instead it just continues being a good episode. And everybody, I think, agrees, at very least, that the moral is really, really good and very sweet, and about how pitching in as you can really make a difference, and it ties into everything we've seen before, so that it really registers, it really has an effect, even though they actually repeat it 3 times. I mean, I guess they just wanted the moral itself to be the high point, the hot streak, and I would argue that it should have been the rising action, and then the moral just continuing to ride that hot streak, but instead it's like they tried to just go for it at the end. And I mean, it came across as definitely a high point, but it could have been that much higher if it had really built up to it like it should have. And I guess they were trying to ride out the sweetness of it by showing us all the different ways it is sweet, and it does have this effect, and it works, but at the same time you notice that they're repeating themselves. So, okay, definitely a good episode, even though it's not great, and I would also argue that it is the best of the Rarity trilogy. It's definitely enough for me to pick it for that, because unlike Canterlot Boutique, it didn't feel the need to make its moral just simple black and white, and instead try to sell it to us by just being really overdramatic about how oh so righteous it is. And unlike Rarity Investigates, it didn't just seem to have like one or two ideas that it was really excited to try, and then just run out of new things to do like halfway through. It felt like we were constantly watching something unfold. It felt like the entertainment was still coming in new ways throughout, and I guess I think if it had decided to really push it at the point, like even if it had just made it a montage of building the stage and watching these characters really come together and really like pull whatever they could manage to really just get behind this and put their hopes in this. But if it had done that, I think that pretty much everyone probably would have been singing this episode's praises over the other two. As is, there seems to be at least a little bit of debate, some Rarity Investigate fans, but no, to me, it is easily the best of the three. Number 8, Scaremaster. To me, this episode has two things going for it just right off the bat. One, I think we can all agree, Halloween is a pretty good setting. And two, Philly Vanilli, which I think we can all agree this was meant to be a follow-up to, is a really good episode. And for a while, I think it really makes the most of both. Like, I really buy this story of Fluttershy just ducking this irrational fear like she always does, even though she's probably aware deep down that it's an irrational fear. But then just realizing how much progress she's made and how far she's come since we've started getting to know her, and then just being like, well, you know what, maybe it's not so bad. Maybe I do want to be a part of this, and I just need to kind of dive in and get used to it. And then meanwhile, like I said, it makes a lot of Nightmare Night as the setting, just all the Halloween-esque scenery, and then that bit where she talks to Granny Smith, and we see how excited for this haunted maze Granny Smith is getting. I mean, I love that line from her, like, ooh, and what's that? Is it the bones of the ponies who didn't make it out alive? Just like, Granny. I absolutely love that moment from her, but, okay, and then the moral it builds to is a knockout. Just the revelation that Fluttershy did need to try this, did need to overcome her fears and realize that she's not bound by them, they don't control her, but then at the same time realizing that she legitimately doesn't like this, and that's okay. She doesn't have to do something that she doesn't like. I mean, different interests and everything. So, okay. I think that was all done really well. Where I have it in 8th place instead of higher is on account of the fact that, like the last one, I don't think it really built on itself as much as it could have. It doesn't skip any steps this time. Like, there is rising action, but actually I think that and pretty much the whole second half kind of seemed like they were going through the motions. Like, I don't think it got a lot out of either the Halloween setting or Fluttershy's story. In fact, Fluttershy spends pretty much the whole second half off screen. We don't even see her, like, I don't know, grinning from the shadows or, like, really starting to get into this, like, ooh, alright, it's working, I can be good at this, or anything like that. I mean, like, for what I might have done differently, for example, like, if any of you have seen Martin, the horror movie about the vampire with no supernatural powers, where there's this scene where he invades this home and he finds this couple there when there was only supposed to be the lady, and so then they kick off this whole just home invasion stalking scene, but instead of just focusing on them, like, ooh, what was that? Was that him? Where is it? Like, trying to hide. It spends just as much time looking at his perspective and seeing how clever he is about manipulating this situation and turning the tables on them. Just like how they're picking up the phone to call the police, and he he knows there's lots of other phones in the place, so he picks up one, and yeah, this is, I don't know if this is still a problem anywhere for people, but yeah, back in the 70s it was, that every time they start dialing, he's listening, he hears them, and then he presses a bunch of buttons, and they're calling to, wait, are you on the other line? And then when they finally realize what might be happening, and the guy goes after him, he like lures him down into the basement and then locks the door on him, and then meanwhile, every time they're not following him, he's mixing up these syringes that he just, like, in his pocket. We see just how fast he can mix these up and get, like, he's already shot the guy up with something and he's just waiting for him to drop, and just it's this virtuoso scene, and that's kind of what I think this could have been like if the writer had really had the desire to kind of keep sinking his teeth into Fluttershy's story and seeing how she keeps getting into this and stuff, but yeah, it doesn't do that. And the Halloween stuff, not impressed. I feel like even compared to a Tim Burton movie or something like that, just the regular stuff kids are scared by, I didn't think the second half was anything special. The monster's not very scary, the cave is not very scary, the Granny Smith skeleton is dispelled instantly because then they hear her talking from up above, and we cut to her, see her, she's guiding ponies around the maze still, so, okay, yeah, the only thing I was really all that impressed by, I thought was any good, was them getting caught in a spider web as they're being chased by a monster. That's kind of a 1-2 punch where they're trapped and they're being chased. So, okay, but yeah, other than that, I thought it was all just very through the motions. I think Hey Arnold managed to do a creepier Halloween episode than that, so okay. Like the last one, I thought it didn't build much of a hot streak, but I do have it ranked ahead of ranked higher of the two, because of the two, I honestly felt like I got more entertainment out of this one. I felt like it, for a while, it was really getting into just like the costumes and the comedy and the scenarios and all of that. And the moral it has at the end, I think, is every bit as good, so 8th place it is. Number 7, The Lost Treasure of Griffinstone. Now, this season kind of seemed to have a thing for not wanting any of the characters to just be the types who are plain and simply bad news, the types that you should maybe learn to avoid or be on guard for, or even, like, kind of protect your friends or the ones you care about from. Like, no, they all had to be sympathetic underneath it all, unless it was one of the characters who was only there to make characters like that seem more sympathetic without actually having to do anything, just by being so over the top and bad that they weren't actually like anyone you'd run into in real life, or maybe just at best an archetype, a played up archetype of someone you'd run into in real life. And this episode actually brought back a character like that, so you could even argue undo one of the show's morals about that, about being on guard for that, and one of the show's better ones in my opinion. So, okay, right away there was a red flag for me where this episode was concerned, but luckily, thanks to the writing by Amy Keating Rogers, it turned out to be very well done. For one, first and foremost, they still made Gilda feel like the same character, the same gruff, short-tempered, kind of standoffish character who was always seemed to be thinking about saving face and stuff like that, and even when she was starting to come around, and we saw her in that flashback as the shy little baby griffin, she still felt like that. They didn't drop her personality, and they made her seem like she was warming up to Pinkie Pie and Rainbow Dash, the other two main characters here, and maybe just starting to get used to their way of doing things. And in fact, the only time where it did feel a little too sweet was where she decides to save them instead of saving the gold statue, and she said, "You're more important to me than some dumb chunk of gold." And like, just, I don't know, it might have even been the actress's delivery. It just, like, if she delivered it a little bit different, or maybe they'd staged it to feel more like just the emotional high point of the scene, just like where everyone's been really, like, put through the ringer, and now it's just like the moment to collapse and decide that everything really did work out for the best. Like, if they'd staged it just a little differently like that, then maybe I could have bought it. But okay, otherwise, it is a very good and subtle character depiction, one that kind of lets us piece together for ourselves that Gilda, through what we see over the course of the episode, would actually appreciate a little positivity thrown her way. It's just that she knows better by now than to ask for it or to honestly expect it, so instead she kind of puts up walls and makes it clear that she can be just as gruff to you as you are to her. So, okay, there's that. And then otherwise, it's just a pretty funny and clever episode, actually. Like, instead of just resorting to reference humor, the kind of reference humor that's just like pointing a finger like, hey, we all know that, right? It comes up with a bunch of different gags. For example, I love the one at the end where Pinkie Pie delivers the moral, where it changes the visual style to be like an infomercial, and she pops up like, "Baking powder makes baked goods and friendships fluffy and delicious." I absolutely love that. That was very funny. And so yeah, otherwise it doesn't build anything like touching or really thought-provoking or anything like that, but it is a fun, smart, likable depiction of all three of the main characters, and that's a fine example of what the show is capable of. And okay, so now I have to note that with that over with, we've kind of reached a different level, because like I said, Season 5 was not my favorite season overall, and while I do like all of the episodes I just went through, you know, there were other seasons where even that last one would have been hard-pressed, or it would have been kind of close as to whether it even made the top 10 list at all, as opposed to, coming in 7th, but okay, as far as I'm concerned, it's all A-grade episodes from here on out. Number 6, the main attraction. Okay, now this is an episode that I thought did a fantastic job vouching for its moral, for the upside of its moral, just with that being how a project or a performance that done as it means the most to you is always the best way to go. For example, that scene at the end where Rara, the celebrity singer, where she finally decides to go that route and to sing this song that she's made about who she really is, that she can fully get behind because she really means it when she's singing. That's a very powerful moment, a very powerful image, and and how too it also means a lot for her friend to see her this way. That all was pretty passionate, pretty powerful. I did not think it did such a good job arguing against the alternate route, which is caring about marketing or creating something that you think that everyone would gravitate to more, to be more inclined to seek out and purchase. Yeah, caring about that more than, or first and foremost at least. So because for one, I mean, it resorted to an over-the-top villain and made him the one vouching for the marketing approach, and it just seemed to make. I mean, the reason that it ultimately was able to say that, okay, no, that's definitely wrong, is because he was just definitely wrong. You so clearly did not want to align yourself with him. And then also some of the arguments for why someone might want to go that route, it seemed to bring them up, but then it kind of seemed to shy away from them. Like, the fact that it can often at least enable you to make a name for yourself, get noticed, all of that. It like hinted at that or brought that up, but then it didn't really do anything to directly refute that. And also the part of the problem was that it seemed to, when it was really getting on its high horse and saying that right, that wrong, some of it sounded kind of sap-headed, like that speech that Ra gives after she sings that big song about how she came to this conclusion and how great that is. I think the song worded it better, despite being trapped by the requirements that you say it in song lyrics and not just directly tell people a story. It has to be kind of poetic in a song, but yeah, even so, the speech seemed like more cliche-ridden and even a little bit prima donna-ish, so, okay, that, points like that, they seemed to weaken the argument a little bit, and afterwards, I wasn't totally sure how to feel. I thought about it, I was trying to decide exactly where where this episode should be ranked, how good it should be considered, and honestly, the more I thought about it, and then more I watched it, after going back and rewatching it a couple of times, I realized that it really was the positive points standing out to me a lot more. I mean, the weak side, the arguments against, they didn't stand out to me that much, even in that I had objections to them. I just was honestly a lot more drawn to the points it was arguing in favor of being true to yourself moral, I guess I'll call it. So, alright, and I guess you could argue that makes the moral weaker because it can't totally refute the opposition, but to me what I decided is that it seemed like the episode acknowledged that there was a counter-argument, and instead of trying to make faulty arguments against it, it said, like, okay, that is there, and I mean, if somebody honestly thought that was important, I mean, we couldn't totally dismiss that, but we want to argue that there is a better way, that this way really is worth it, it really is worth going after. And there's something to be said for that, I mean, instead of just totally dismissing an alternate point of view, just vouching for your own, and then leaving it to the audience to decide, there can be something powerful about that, even though not being able to refute, relying on less effective ways of refuting it was a legitimate detraction at points. But okay, I think though the part of the reason that it was able to argue for what it was arguing for so well is because of the character they chose to put in the center of this conflict and undergo this arc, to basically guide this moral, and that, of course, was Applejack. And coincidentally, I think part of the reason it worked so well with her is because the team finally started being true to her character after some of her past episodes have started to make people kind of sick of the route they were trying to, or sick of not even new routes, just forced routes they were trying to go with her, because basically it seems like they're afraid to not downplay her maturity, the fact that she's a little more level-headed than her friends, because, to my understanding, they think that, or thought at least, that she can't be as interesting a character and can't make for as good a conflict if they don't throw in flaws and eccentricities that either weren't really there before or are like played up versions of what we saw before, or even kind of contradict what we saw before. And so, okay, but here I think she has done both in this episode. She's been an interesting character and gone through an arc and had an interesting conflict, and it made for probably the best episode, her best episode this season, and in a season that was already, I think, kind of doing away with that approach to her character, and one point in the season's favor, starting to seem like her best season in a very long time. So, okay, because, like, for one, she has unique and interesting traits that you'd think she would have. She is not all that interested in show business or anything like that, not caught up in fads. She's blunt and straightforward. She doesn't censor herself or hold anything back when she thinks that what she's saying is right, and she doesn't doubt herself fighting for the right reasons. She doesn't stop to question herself thinking, like, am I getting greedy? And that's how much confidence in herself she has to do the right thing. And that makes her a little bit confrontational at points and not always the easiest to get along with, but it also makes her very reassuring. It also makes her very empathetic, and because of that, I think she's kind of the one you trust to vouch for this moral, although at the same time, she's not just like the spirit guide on this journey. This conflict is happening to her too, because while, okay, she's confident in herself, she knows what she wants to be, and what she wants out of life, she's not always great at empathizing with other ways of being, other points in life, not always great at understanding why someone else might want to go a different direction. So what she needs work on is not even her empathy, because she's very compassionate, but just her patience, her understanding. So, okay, there are lots of conflicts in life that don't center around personal insecurity, and I mean, that's another way you can go with someone that can be very interesting, as it is here, I would argue. So, and as a matter of fact, I think it makes for a pretty endearing story here as they both, Rara and Applejack, undergo this arc. It's like that scene at the beginning where we flash back to them as kids. That's very adorable, and it says a lot in a short period of time. And then as this episode goes on, how they reconnect and they maybe try to figure out how to regard each other, how to feel about each other. It's like they both want to like each other, but they're both unsure about a lot. And okay, that progresses very nicely, and then Applejack just continuing to push for this because it means a lot to her. She thinks it's very important, and ultimately being able to show her friend Rara as a friend that okay, this, I think you're going to be very happy if you take this route, or that, I mean, yeah, this alternate route, you're not really getting a whole lot out of it, and I think I have total faith that you're still worth watching, worth listening to as yourself. I mean, I can tell you firsthand as your friend. So, alright, all in all, I think, yeah, it's a very endearing episode, and it follows an arc through Applejack that allows this moral to build to this high point, with Rara singing her heart out and Applejack looking on so happy for her. So, okay, yeah, even if the downside is, I guess, distracting enough to maybe put a minus next to the A, this is just one of those times where just sheer passion and the power of the delivery manages to put it over the top. So, okay, congratulations to Amy Keating Rogers for going out the very first writer in this show to upstage the season finale.